Masechet Baba Kama Daf Sadi Gimel, in which we complete the 8th perek and begin the 9th perek. We saw in Agadah that if someone prays on behalf of someone else, then the prayer's own request will be answered first for himself, if he needs the same thing. Right? If you have a certain sickness and you pray for someone else that has that sickness, then your sickness will be cured first. We now learn, based on that, the opposite. The same is true the other way around regarding curses. Amar Rav Hanan, Hamoser din al chavero hu ne'anash techila shnemar, vatomer Sarai l'Abraham, Hamasi alecha, uchtiv, vayavo Abraham lispod Sarah ve'libkota. Rav Hanan teaches that someone who passes his judgment against his friend up to heaven, he will get punished first. In other words, if someone, instead of, let's say, have some complaint about someone else, right? There's some fight or disagreement. So what a person should do if he has a disagreement is either confront the other party directly, right? Say, here, you did this thing wrong. Can we work this out? Or take it to a judge, take it to a bet din, take it to a third party, an intermediary, and try to work it out. That's the proper way to go. If instead one calls to heaven, complains about the person, and curses him, right? May God punish that person for what he did to me. That's not the right way to go. And if someone does that and curses someone else, meaning calls upon God's judgment upon someone else, then the person who makes that complaint will himself be punished first. How do we know this? Sarai Imenu does such a thing. When Sarah sees that Abraham had a child with Hagar, she gets upset. This is, obviously you were praying for yourself, but not for me, right? And she says, I am angry at you. May God judge between me and you. So Sarai spoke there out of anger and took him to heavenly court, cursed him, rather than going to a mediator or discussing directly with him and saying, why did you do that? What ended up happening? Sarai herself got punished first because she died before Abraham. As it says, Sarah died, and then Abraham came to mourn over her. Otherwise, perhaps Sarah would have lived many years longer. But this is true only if there is a possibility of judgment on earth. If there is a local bet din, or a person, a third party, a mediator who can intervene and settle the matter. If such an option exists, then one has to do that. If not, however, if you're in a situation where there is no court, there is no justice, there is no possibility of dealing with it in a different route, then it's okay to complain to God and say, God, this person did wrong to me. May you be the judge. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Oy lo lasoek yoter min ha-nis'ak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, woe to the complainer more than the object of the complaint. For the same reason, you're going to call out to God. Are you so perfect, right? If God does come down and judges it, maybe they will find you wanting as well. It's like issuing a complaint to the police or to the IRS about someone else, and they say, how about you, right? Are you so perfect? Tanyan mihachi echad hasoek ve'echad hanitzak b'mashma ela shmarin lasoek yoter min hanitzak. A Braita supports what Rabbi Yitzchak says, that there is a something coming both to the complainer and to the one that they complained about. Both of them, right? If there is a wrong done, then both will be punished. But the one who complains will get punished quicker than about the one about who the complaint is. Assuming, of course, that the complainer has some fault as well, and didn't follow through with other channels where he could have settled the matter more easily. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, more on the discussion of curses, that a curse, even from a common, ordinary person, should not be light in your eyes. It's not good. You don't want to be on anyone's bad side, right? Just like a beracha, even from a common person, is a good thing. So too, a curse, even from a commoner, is not good. Who maybe might have been politically important and rich person, but religiously he was a commoner, and he cursed Sarah, and the curse came true. Even though, who was he to curse? Shene'emar, hinehu lach kesut aynayim. after Abimelech was sending away Sarah, go back home, he gave her gifts, and among them it says it should be a covering of the eyes. And the Peshat, it sounds like it's talking about some kind of jewelry or veil that he gives to her as a covering over her eyes. However, the Midrash takes it in a different way. Amar la ho'il v'chisit mimeni v'lo gilichehu ishech v'garamt elai hasad hazei rason shihulach bene kesuye einayim. Rather, Avimelech said, because you, Sarah, covered my eyes, and you didn't reveal that you are married and the husband of Avraham, and you caused me this plague to come upon my house and all this suffering. So therefore, Avimelech says, may it be God's will that you should have children who will be covered of eyes, who will be blinded. And sure enough, that came true when it came Bezarah Dichtiv, Vahiki Zaken Yitzchak, Vatichena, Enav Medaot, and sure enough, her son Yitzchak, when he was old, his eyes were dim, and that then led to the whole problem of him not recognizing his own sons and being tricked and so on. Amar Rabbi Abhu, le'olam yeh adam min hanirdafim ve'lo min hadrodfin she'en lecha nirdaf be'ofot yoter min torim u'bnei Yonah v'chshiran hakatub legabe mizbeach. A person should always be among the pursued and not among the pursuers. In other words, you should always be root for the underdog. Don't be the pursuer that goes and harms other people. Better to be harmed than to be an evil person that causes harm to others. How do we know this? We learned it from the birds, that there is no bird that's pursued more than doves and pigeons. All the other predatory birds go and hunt them, and yet it's specifically those two birds that are kosher birds and fit to be sacrificed on the Mizbeach. This hints to something very fundamental about the kosher birds. The Torah does not have signs for birds, as it does for animals and fish. But it gives a list of the kosher birds and non-kosher birds, and you see that what non-kosher birds have in common is that they are predatory, whereas kosher birds are tame. And so you see, you are what you eat, and in fact, right, we have to learn, just like birds, the kosher ones, the ones that are sacrificed, or the ones that are pursued, so too, sometimes Bnei Yisrael are pursued and persecuted, but better to be persecuted than among those who will persecute others. Ha-omer sameh et aini. The Mishnah said that if someone goes to his friend and asks him, can you please do me a favor, cut off my hand, break my leg, and you'll be exempt if you do so, and then that person does it, the person is liable nevertheless. Whereas if I go and I say, hey, could you do me a favor and tear my clothing, break my jug, and you'll be exempt if you do it, and you go and do it, then you are exempt. So we're going to ask, what's the difference? Amar le Rav Aseh bar Hamal Rava, Maishin Haresha, Maishin Hasefa. It sounds like in both of them, they should be the same. Generally, when it comes to monetary things, a person always has a right to forego the monetary rights that he has, right? You owe me money? Forget about it, right? You did damage? Forget about it. You don't have to pay. So how come in the Sefa, we say that if I say, here, tear my clothes, you don't have to pay. But if I say, here, break my arm and you won't have to pay, then you still have to pay. What's the difference? We're going to see about 3 reasons for this. Rava answered that in the Resha, a person does not forego compensation for the loss of his limbs, his extremities. In other words, even though the person, even if I say, cut off my arm and you won't have to pay, I don't really mean it. People don't really mean that. Why would they say it if they don't mean it? Well, I don't know, maybe they're saying it, they have a lot of shame or anger, or they're just feeling very, very down, and they're like, you know what, I want you to cut off my hand. Okay, even if I say it and I say you don't have to pay, still I don't mean it. Or maybe I'm saying it as a dare, right? I dare you. Go, cut off my hand. Yeah, you won't have to pay. Let me see if you have the guts to poke out my eye. Okay, so a person might say that when they're in some kind of weird mood, but if you ask them at the end of the day, did you really mean it and you don't want to get paid? Then when they calm down, they'll say, no, I did not really mean it. So therefore, that's the difference. Whereas for breaking a jug, I say, break my jug and you don't have to pay. That a person may forego. They don't care about the jug so much and they don't mind it being broken. So a person will forego monetary things, but a person's not going to forego their right to physical injury. Amale, v'chi adam ochel al sa'aro. But Rav Aseh bar Chama, who asked the question in the first place, counters. He says, is that true? Would you apply that also to pain? Right? Does a person forego and say, yes, cause me pain, and that's okay? After all, the Tanya, hakeni fesa'eni amenat liftor patur. We have a braita that if I say, I want you to hit me, strike me, and you won't have to pay, then you are exempt. So it seems here that a person is willing to forego physical pain, and yet, Rava, you said that a person is not willing to forego loss of extremities. Like, so what's the difference? And Rava did not have an answer. So, Amar, midi shemi alach beha. Rava says, well, do you have anything to say about this? Maybe you heard a different answer. Amar lehachi amar Rav Sheshat, mishum pegam mishpacha. He says, yes, I did hear a different answer. Rav Sheshat said that the reason why, if in the first Deresha, if I say here, you can cut off my arm and you don't have to pay, that you still have to pay is because when you cut off my arm, it's not only causing me personally pain and injury and embarrassment and so on, but also my family. All right, it affects the family, that the family now has a family member who is missing a limb, has a hard time, doesn't look the same as everybody else, and so that will affect since it affects the family. It's not in a person's right to say, I forego, right? I can't forego physical damage, permanent damage to my own body, because I can't forgive it on behalf of the rest of my family, who will also suffer some of the consequences. That's the difference. That's why when it comes to cutting off a limb, a person's foregoing and saying, you don't have to pay, we discount that. That's different from pain. Or if I say, yeah, go ahead, punch me in the stomach, punch me in the arm, I'll take the pain, and you won't have to pay. There, I'm the one that suffers the pain. The rest of my family is not going to suffer it. There, one can forego that payment. Itmar, Rabbi Oshaya Omer, Amar, Mishum Pega Mishpacha. Not Rav Sheshat, but also Rabbi Oshaya said the same answer. That the reason why cutting off a limb you cannot forego is because it affects the family too. Rava Amar Mishum she'en adam mochel al rashe evarim shelo. Rava here, same as what he said up here, is because a person does not forego cutting off of the limbs. Perhaps a person would forego just pain. Right? Maybe they would. I'm in the mood to feel some pain. I'm very aggrieved, whatever. But nobody is going to forego damage to his extremity, a permanent loss of his arm or leg. And so, even if a person says so, we assume that they don't really mean it. Okay, so those were two answers. And now we have a third explanation between why the Resha and the Sefa are different. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, yesh hen shehu kelav, v'yesh lav shehu kehen. Sometimes yes, hen means yes. Sometimes yes means no, and sometimes no means yes. How so? Sometimes people are speaking rhetorically, and here we're going to explain. Tanya Namehachi, we have a braita that explains, and this is an elaboration on what the Mishnah may mean. Hakeni fitza'eni al menat liftor v'amar lo hen. So let's say I say, strike me, wound me, I want you to hit me, and then you say, on condition that I will be exempt, right? You want to know, okay, listen, I'm happy to hit you, but will I be exempt? And then I say, yes. And I say it in a rhetorical way to mean like, what? Oh, you think you're going to be exempt? I'm saying, yeah, go ahead, hit me, give me your best punch, and you want to be exempt. I say, what? You want to be exempt? Right? Yeah? But yes means no. So that's the case that the Mishnah is talking about, where even though I said, yes, you are not liable to pay, I said it in a rhetorical way where I don't really mean it. That's why you have to pay. That's an example of yes, that means no. Whereas the sefa kerait kisuti amanat liftor amar lo lav hare lav shehu kehen. If I say, do me a favor, I want you to tear my clothes. And you say, well, I'll tear them, but Is that on condition that I don't have to pay? And I say, no, meaning, right, no, are you not going to pay? Of course you're going to pay. That's like a no, that means yes. And so that in such a case, it would mean right, like lav. I said tear my clothes, and you said on condition that I'll be exempt, and I say no, will you not be exempt? Of course you'll be exempt, right? I'm giving you permission. So that's the case of the sefa, where I gave you, even though I said no, but I really meant yes, and yes, that you are exempt, and so that you don't have to pay. So that means I really meant that you don't have to pay. Now, it could be the other way around. So there, according to Yochanan, theoretically, there could be a case where I say, cut off my arm, and you say, you really mean it? I don't have to pay? And I say, yes, indeed, I really mean it. I say sincerely, not rhetorically. So then it is possible that you'd be exempt. Whereas according to the Bioshaya, there's no way you could ever be exempt for cutting off my arm, because you still caused humiliation to the rest of the family. All right, those are the three explanations of the difference between the Resha and the Sefa of our Mishnah. Shabed et kadi, kira et kisuti hayab. The Mishnah mentioned, if I say, can you break my jug or tear my garment, and then you do so, you have to pay. Unless I explicitly say you will be exempt from payment, but if you don't explicitly say that, then you have to pay. Ur minhi lishmor velo le'abed, lishmor velo likroa, lishmor velo lehalek la'aniyim. We have a contradiction from a baraita that talks about giving something to a person to watch, and then if I give you something to watch, you are responsible for it if something happens to it. So the Baraita learns the word lishmor means, if I give it to you to watch, then you're responsible, but not if I give it to you to destroy. If I give it to you to destroy and say, here, destroy this, then it's okay. You're not responsible, right? Lishmor. If you're only responsible if I give it to you to watch, and not if I tell you to tear it. If I give you something and say, here, tear it, then you're not responsible. Only if I give it to you to watch, but not if I say, here's something, give it to the poor. If I tell you to give it to the poor and then you don't give it to the poor, you're not liable to me because I gave it to you to give out. So you have to go and give it to some poor. Now the poor, the poor person, no single poor person can collect it from you either, because you could always say, well, I want to give it to a different poor person. But the point is that you're not liable for keeping that money. There's no one that can bring you to court to pay it, because only if I give you something to watch, then you're liable to get it back to me. But if I give you something to destroy, tear, or give away to others, then you are not responsible for it. So now here's the contradiction. The Mishnah said that if I give you something and I tell you to tear it, and you tear it, you are liable. But according to the Beracha, if I give you something and tell you to tear it and you tear it, then you are not liable. Amar Ravuna la kashya, hada telideh, hada la telideh. Ravuna says, no, there's talking about two different cases. The Mishnah is talking about a case where first I give it to you, it got to your hands, and then I say, I want you to tear it. That in that case you'd be liable, because when I give it to you, I'm giving it to you to safeguard, and in order to change that over into a giving of tearing, I would have to say explicitly that you're not liable. Whereas the Beracha is talking about a case where I didn't give it to you yet. I say, here, I have this item, I want you to tear it. Here. So in that case, I never gave it to you as a shomer, so you never had responsibility for it. In that case, you can tear it, and you would not be liable, because you were never responsible to safeguard it in the first place. Amar le Rabba lishmor da'ateli de mashma. Rabba says that doesn't fit with the wording of the Beracha, because the Beracha says if I give you something lishmor, you are responsible, but not if I give it to you le'abed. It sounds like it's a case where I already gave it to you. I give it to you, and then I say, oh, can you tear it? So it sounds like the Beracha is also a case where I already gave it to you, and then I said to tear it. Ela maraba, have hada talide vlakashya, hada talide betorat shmira, hada talide betorat kiri'ah. So Rabba explains both of them are cases where I gave it to you, I gave you the item, and you already took possession of it. And the difference is the Mishnah is where I give it to you to safeguard. Here, can you safeguard this for me? And then I say, you know what? I want you to tear it up. In that case, if you tear it, you're responsible because you first were there to safeguard. Only if I say explicitly, and you will not be responsible, then you can. Whereas the Beraita is the case where I gave it to you in the first place for tearing, right? I said, here, take this, tear it. And so all I have to do is say that, and then the assumption is that you will not be responsible, and I don't have to say that explicitly. Hahu arnaka tisdaka da'atel pumpedita afkada Rav Yosef kabeh hu gabra peshaba atu ganabe ganvu chiyebe Rav Yosef. We have a certain case of a purse full of charity money that came to Pumpedita. Rav Yosef got this purse of money and he deposited it with a certain man. He says, here, can you hold on to this purse of money? We're going to have to give it to the poor. Now, this man was negligent. He did not safeguard it properly, and thieves came and stole it. So Rav Yosef came to the guy and said, you're responsible to pay it back, right? How much was in there? $1,000. You have to come up with $1,000, then pay it back so that we can give it to the poor. Abaye challenged him. Wait a second, we already had a braita that one is responsible to pay back only if he received an item to safeguard for the master. But if it's to either destroy or to distribute to the poor, then he's not responsible. And here, Rav Yosef gave it to this guy, not to safeguard, but rather he says, listen, hold on to this, because I want you to give it to the poor. And we already said, so who can sue him? Rav Yosef cannot sue him because he's not giving it to him as his own personal property, and no single poor person can sue him because he can always say, well, I meant to give it to a different poor person. You'd have to make a class action suit of all poor people to get to come together, and they didn't have that. So why did Rav Yosef hold him responsible if in the Braita says he's not responsible? Amarle anieh defumpedita mikas kislehu velishmorhu. Rav Yosef says the poor people in Pumpedita, they have a set amount to receive, right? That's how the charity works there. It's not up to you to decide, I want to give you $5, I want to give you $10, I want to give you nothing. No, you can't decide that. We have a system here that every poor person gets a fixed sum, and therefore you have to safeguard it for them. It's kind of like it is in fact owed directly to these particular poor people, and therefore you were safeguarding it on behalf of them, and you have to give it to them, and they can therefore sue you for it. And because you were negligent in watching it, you have to come up with the money and pay yourself. Hazran alach hachobel. We now begin the 9th Perek HaGozel Atzim. The basic principle here is that if someone steals an item, then the robber has to give that item back, of course, plus double. But if the item is still intact, then he has to give it back. However, if the item goes through some kind of significant change, then the robber actually acquires the item thereby. It's a change in it, so now it's not exactly the same item as before. And in that case, the robber keeps the item and pays the value, and the value will be the original value at the time that he stole it. That's the principle behind this following Mishnah. Hagozel esim v'asa'an kelim semer v'asa'an begadim meshalem kishat hagezela. If a thief steals wood, just plain wood, and he makes a chair out of it, or he steals wool and then he makes a sweater out of it. So now, since he changed it significantly by turning it into a chair or into a sweater, he doesn't have to give back the wood itself or the sweater itself, but rather he pays for it at the value that was at the time that he stole it, right? The chair is obviously going to be worth more than just plain wood, and the sweater will be worth more than just plain wool. So he keeps the item and pays for the price of the raw material when he stole it. Gazal para me'obedet v'yalda, Rachel tuna ugzazaha, mishalem demeh para omedet leled udme Rachel omedet ligazez. In the first case, the price went up because he made it into something better. In this case, the price goes down because he stole a pregnant cow, which is worth a lot. And then it gave birth. So now that it gave birth, now it's worth less. So what's the law? Or similarly, if he stole a lamb, and it was full of wool, and then he sheared it, so now it's worth less than at the time that he stole it. He has to pay for, he doesn't give back the cow or the lamb as is, because now it's worth less than it was before. Rather, he has to pay the amount of the cow when it was pregnant, and it has to pay the value of the lamb when it was full of wool, right before it's ready to be shorn. Third case, Gazal para v'nit'abera eslo v'yalda. Rachel ונטענה אצלו וגזזה. משלם כשעת הגזלה. כל זה כלל, כל הגזלנים משלמים כשעת הגזלה. If he robbed a cow, a plain old cow, and then after it was stolen, it became pregnant and then gave birth, went up in value and then down in value, or he stole a sheep and it didn't have wool on it, but then it grew wool so much, and then he sheared it, so the value again went up and down. Again, here we tell the robber you have to pay the original price of the item at the time that you stole it, and so the general rule is that all robbers pay according to the time of the robbery. That's the Mishnah. Amre, Aisim vasan kelim in shipan la, semer vasan begadim in libena la. From the examples of the Mishnah, we can infer that only if the robber does a significant change, like take wood and turn it into a vessel, then he acquires the item, and he only pays for the amount of the original raw material. But let's say he didn't turn it into a chair. He stole raw wood and he sanded it. That's not a significant change, and he would have to return the actual item. Or similarly regarding wool, if he turned it into a sweater, then he acquired it. That's a significant change. But let's say he only washed the wool. That's not a significant change. Just from the examples of the Mishnah, this is what we are inferring. We are inferring that if he just washed it, then he would have to return the original wool. Okay, that makes sense. The problem is that it contradicts a baraita. What mean he? Gazal asim v'shipan abanim v'sitetan semer v'libenan pishtan v'nikahu meshalem kishat hagezela. The baraita teaches that if someone steals wood and sanded it, or steals stones and smoothed them out, or steals wool and washed it, or steals flax and cleaned it, he has to pay according to the time of the robbery. In other words, he doesn't return the item now, because now it's worth more, now that it's nice and sanded or nice and cleaned. So according to the Beracha, sanding it or cleaning it is considered a significant change by which the thief acquires the item, and now he has to pay the original price. So we have a contradiction between the Mishnah that says sanding and washing is not a significant change, and the Beraita that says that it is. How can we explain this? Amar Abaye, Tanadi dan katani shinui de Rabbanan de Hadra, v'chol sheken shinui de Oraita. Abaye says our Tana has a different view than the Beraita, and our Tana thinks that even a change that is reversible, like building a chair. It's true, you have a chair now, but it's reversible. You can just take the chair apart, and then you have the raw materials again. If you knit a sweater with wool, you can always just take out one knot, unravel the sweater, and then you have the yarn again. So this type of change is only considered a significant change midirabanan. So the Tana of our Mishnah considers even this type of change that is reversible, even though only according to rabbinic law would it be considered a change, considers that to be a significant change, such that the robber acquires and keeps the item and pays for it. And so the Tana of the Mishnah would say certainly 100% for sure if it was a permanent change, an irreversible change, like sanding something where you can't go back, or washing something you can't go back to the original way it was, all the more so that's considered a significant change. So actually, the author of the Mishnah would agree with the author of the Beraita. The Beraita was only giving examples of permanent changes that are changes from Torah law, and the Mishnah is adding not only permanent changes. It might seem like a smaller change because you're only sanding it, but actually it's a significant one because it's permanent. And not only that, but even turning it into a chair or into a sweater, which is a reversible change, as only the Rabbanan. Even there we say the robber has acquired it and he pays for the original value. So here now we explain this answer. And when the Mishnah says that you take wood and you turn it into vessels, we're talking about someone who robs sanded wood. It's already nice finished wood. And so what does that mean? They're boards that are ready to use, and you can make a chair out of it, all right, just a couple of nails, and then you can take it apart, and then you have the nice wood again. And when the Mishnah mentioned semer v'asan begadim b'semer tavui deshinui dada libriyatahu tibaya satar lev v'kol sheken shinui deoraita. When I mentioned wool to make clothing, it was talking about wool that is already spun. It's already a nice thread, and there you can knit a sweater, you crochet it, and then you can take it apart and turn it back into yarn. And so these are reversible changes, and the Mishnah is teaching it even there at the Rabbanan level. The robber acquires it and therefore keeps it and only pays, and all the more so if it was unfinished wood and he sanded it, or unwashed, or a raw wool that he then spun it, prepared it, that would be an irreversible change, and there, all the more so, the thief would keep it and would pay for the value. Whereas the Tana of the Baraita only listed Torah changes that are irreversible and did not list the reversible changes, which are only considered changes midirabanan. All that is one explanation of the difference between the Mishnah and the Beraita. But now we have a second one. Rav Asher Amar, Tanadidan name shinui deoraita ketane. Here Rav Asher says, actually, our Mishnah is not listing reversible changes that are only changes midrabanan, but is actually referring to permanent changes that are at a Doraita level, considered significant changes that the robber keeps. And what is it talking about? When it says that you took wood and fashioned it into vessels, it's talking about where he made a pestle. And what did he do? He took raw wood and he sanded it to make the pestle. So it is in fact talking about a case of sanding, which is irreversible. And when the Mishnah said semer vasan begadim namte dainu shinui de la adar, when it says you took wool and turned it into garments, talk about making felt, which is not made by sewing, weaving, but rather felt is made by putting pressure, heat, and moisture, and it creates this material that is actually irreversible. You can't get the threads back after that. And that's what the Mishnah is talking about. And so therefore, both the Mishnah and the Beraita are in agreement, and they're both talking about irreversible deoraita, significant changes, where the robber keeps the item because he changed it significantly. Good. Now we ask a new question. Vilibun mi have shinui. In the Beraita that we quoted above, it said that washing is considered a permanent change. Washing wool makes a permanent change, and the robber keeps it and only pays the original value. But here's the problem: is a contradiction with the Mishnah. Would mean he lo ispikli tino lo ad shesebao patur libeno velo sebao hayav. This Mishnah is talking about the obligation of reshit hagez, the first shearing. The farmer, the shepherd, has to give to the kohen. Now, he has to give only the raw material, so that if the shepherd did not give it as raw material, but rather dyed it first, then he no longer has to give it to the kohen, because now he changed it. This is a place where significant change will affect the law. So if he dyed it, he doesn't have to give it, but if he only washed it and didn't dye it, then the shepherd has to still give it to the kohen. So we see that in the Mishnah in Cholin, washing is not considered a significant change, but in the Beraita above, it said that washing is a significant change. So what's going on here? We're going to have three answers. Amar Abaye lakashya ha Rabbi Shimon ha Rabbanan detanya gezazo teva'o v'arago en mistaref libeno, Rabbi Shimon omer en mistarev, Chachamim omerim mistarev. Abaye explains that the Baraita says washing is a significant change is a opinion of Rabbi Shimon, whereas the Mishnah that says washing is not a change is the opinion of Rabbanan. We see there are two opinions in the following Baraita. It says if a shepherd sheared the wool and he also spun it and wove it, now it's a new thing, so it does not combine to make the minimum quantity of wool. See, in order to have to give the wool, the sheet, I guess, to the Kohen, has to be a minimum amount. That if it's just a little bit of wool, you don't have to give anything at all. So, what do you count as being coming together for that minimum? Only if it's raw wool. If it's not raw wool, then there's no obligation to give it to the Kohen. So then it's not going to combine. So for sure. Everyone agrees that if you spun it and wove it, then that's a significant change. The machloket is, what if you only washed it? Rabbi Shimon says that's a significant change and it does not combine to make the minimum amount. Chachamim say that washing it is not a significant change and it will therefore combine. So this is Abaye's answer. The Baraita that says it is a significant change is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and the Mishnah that says washing is not a significant change is the opinion of Rabbanan. That's answer number one. Rava Amar, ha veha Rabbi Shimon. No, maybe I can explain both the Baraita and the Mishnah according to Rabbi Shimon. De la kashya, ha de napuse, ha de sarke, saruke. And he explains that the Mishnah is talking about a case where the washer only untangled the wool by hand, which is not a very effective, and washed it. So that's not a very effective washing, and therefore it remains unchanged. Whereas the Baraita is talking about a case where he combed it first and then washed it. That is a very significant process, a significant change, and so in that case it turns into something different. And so even though they both talk about washing, it makes a difference whether you untangle it only, which is not a significant change, or comb it, which is a significant change. And so the first is the Mishnah, and the second one is the Baraita. Third answer to be Chia bar Rabin Amar, ha de chavere chavure, ha de chabere chabure. Okay, Rabbi Chia says the Mishnah is talking about where he simply whitens it. Not a very thorough washing, not a significant change. That's the Mishnah. Whereas the Baraita is talking about where he bleached it with sulfur, which causes an irreversible, very significant change. And so he is able to explain, yes, they're both called washing, but they're two different processes. Okay, Rabbi Shimon la have shinui, libui have shinui. Now going back to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, we saw that he thinks that washing is a significant change. The problem is in the following Baraita, we're going to see that according to Rabbi Shimon, dyeing is not a significant change. So does that make any sense that washing should cause a serious change, but dyeing to a different color is not a significant change? What's this Baraita? The Tanya. Gazaz rishon uspa'ah, rishon utva'ah, rishon va'arago, and mistaref. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, Mishum Rabbi Shimon Seba'ah Mistaref. The Tanakh of this Baraita says that if the shepherd is shearing, and as he shears one sheep, he dyes it before shearing the next one, so that then he never accumulates enough for the minimal amount. Or as he shears it, he spins it into wool, into thread. Or as he shears it, he weaves it. All these are significant changes, and therefore it never adds up to the minimum. However, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, that's our Rabbi Shimon, says if he dyes it, dyeing is not a significant change, and it will combine. So here's this is the source of our problem. How could it be that dyeing is not a significant change, but just washing is a significant change? A couple of answers. Amar Abaye la kashya. Ha Rabbanan alibad Rabbi Shimon. Ha Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda alibad Rabbi Shimon. There's two different traditions about what Rabbi Shimon said. And so the earlier Baraita was the majority of the rabbis in the name of Rabbi Shimon. They all said that washing is a significant change, whereas this Baraita beraita that we just quoted is Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. It's his tradition about what Rabbi Shimon says, and in that tradition, no, even dyeing is not a significant change, and certainly washing would not be a significant change. There's two different opinions about what Rabbi Shimon said. Rava Amar le'olam la peligi rabanan aleh Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. But Rava says a completely different answer. In fact, the rabbis do not have no disagreement with what Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. There's no dispute about what Rabbi Shimon said, and in fact, washing is a significant change, right? As we said before. Now, over here, when he talks about dyeing, we assume that dyeing is a bigger process than washing, but not necessarily so. It's not necessarily more irreversible. When you dye, even though you dye something and it's set in, but you can go and get some soap, some strong soap, and you can remove the dye, and it goes back to its previous state. Not so with washing, especially good washing with combing. That will permanently change it, but actually dyeing is reversible. And when in the Mishnah Chulin we said that if the shepherd shears wool and didn't give it to the kohen yet, and he dyed it, and then he doesn't have to give it, and we said that everyone agrees with this law. So this is strange. Why should everybody agree with this law? If he only dyed it, isn't dyeing a reversible process? And therefore, it's not a significant change, and he should still have to give it to a kohen, if based on what you just said. The answer to that is bakala ilan de la avad. No, the Mishnah is talking about indigo. Indigo is a very strong dye that cannot be removed with soap. That's a permanent change, and everybody agrees that that's such a significant change that then he doesn't have to give that the wool to the kohen anymore. Whereas over here in this beraita, we're talking about regular dye, not indigo, which is reversible, and that's why in that case the dyeing is not considered a permanent change, not considered a significant change. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen ve'amen.